Fourth floor of a brownstone on 116th Street. No sign on the door. No music. No laughter. Just the hum of industrial air conditioning cranked so high that breath hangs in the air like smoke. Inside that room, 50 women stand shoulder to shoulder at stainless steel tables. Every single one of them is completely naked. This isn't fantasy. This isn't exploitation. This is mathematics. On the table in front of them, one brick of pure heroin, blue magic. 98% purity. When cut, bagged, and distributed, this single kilo will generate over $300,000 in street revenue. A man in a dark suit walks the line, hands behind his back, eyes cold as winter. He doesn't look at their faces. He looks at their hands, their movements, the floor beneath their feet. You know his name, Frank Lucas. The rule is brutal. The rule is genius. No clothes, no pockets, no place to hide even a single grain of the king's blood. Listen, Frank says, voice low like a sermon. You're here because I trust you. Don't make me wrong. Above them, hidden behind false walls, armed guards watch through one-way glass. Below them, a basement with a furnace and a drain. The security system here is older than cameras, simpler than alarms, and permanent as death. Why strip them bare? Why this humiliation? Because in Frank's world, theft doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the hands that touch your product first. One woman skimming just one bag per shift. 50 women, 7 days a week. That's $7,000 walking out the door daily. Over $2.5 million bleeding from his empire annually. Frank Lucas didn't build the most profitable drug operation in American history by trusting anybody. Not the Italians who laughed at him. Not the cops who took his money. Not even these women who transform his pure product into the poison that owns Harlem's veins. But here's what nobody tells you about legends. The same paranoia that builds an empire destroys the man who wears the crown. Frank thought he was untouchable, invisible. The ghost who beat the 5 families at their own game. He cut out the middlemen, bought pure heroin from Southeast Asian warlords, and smuggled it home in the coffins of dead American soldiers. He was making $1 million a day while staying completely off everyone's radar, until the night he decided to step into the light. One coat, one moment of vanity, one choice that would turn the King of Harlem into the most wanted man in America. If you want to understand how a country boy from North Carolina outsmarted the Italian mafia, built an invisible empire, and then lost it all because of a piece of fur, you need to subscribe right now. Because today we're not just telling a story. We're dissecting the rise and fall of a legend who proved that in the Game of Thrones, silence is power, but ego is death. This is Frank Lucas, the untold legend. 1968. Harlem burns with revolution, but inside the midnight blue Cadillac rolling down rain-slicked Lenox Avenue, the world moves in funeral silence. Frank Lucas grips the steering wheel, hands steady at 10 and 2, eyes scanning wet asphalt that reflects neon signs like broken promises. In the back seat, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson breathes like a drowning man. Bumpy Johnson. The original Don, the king who built Harlem's underworld with his bare hands and now watches it slip through dying fingers. Frank adjusts the rearview mirror. Bumpy's face is gray, sweat beading despite the air conditioning running full blast. The old man clutches his chest but waves off concern with a hand that once commanded armies. That hand shakes now. Pull over, Bumpy says, voice like gravel dragged across concrete. Frank guides the Cadillac to the curb near 135th Street. Engine idling. rain drumming the roof like 1,000 tiny fists counting down to something final. Bumpy leans forward, studying the street through rain-streaked glass. Junkies huddle in doorways. Italian-owned trucks double park in black neighborhoods. White cops lean on corners that don't belong to them. "You know what kills a king, Frank?" Bumpy asks. Frank stays quiet. When Bumpy teaches, the lessons come wrapped in riddles, delivered in the spaces between words. It ain't the cops. It ain't the feds. It ain't even the bullets. Bumpy coughs, wet and deep. The rat ain't in the gutter, Frank. The rat is at your table, eating your food, counting your money, sleeping in your house. Frank has heard variations of this sermon, but tonight feels different. Tonight feels like last words. "You remember, Marcus?" Bumpy gestures toward a dimly lit bar across the street. Bartender. Good kid. Showed up on time, kept the place clean, smiled at customers. Found out he was watering down my liquor, pocketing the difference. $300 a month. You know what $300 a month becomes over 12 years? Frank does the math instantly. $43,200. $43,200, Bumpy echoes. Stolen by a man I trusted, a man I gave work when nobody else would hire him. Every hand that touches your money takes a piece, Frank. You don't lose fortunes to enemies. You lose them to friends. The rain intensifies. Through the windshield, Harlem looks like a watercolor painting melting in real time. The Italians think they own these streets, Bumpy continues, voice growing urgent. Genovese, Gambino, Lucchesi. To them, we're servants, errand boys, country boys who should know our place. But they're loud, Frank. They wear their power like cheap cologne. Everybody knows their names, their faces, their business. The loud man dies, Frank says quietly. The loud man dies, Bumpy confirms. The silent man lives. When I'm gone, these streets are going to eat themselves. The Italians will move in. Young boys will fight over scraps. Everybody's going to want the throne. Bumpy meets Frank's eyes in the mirror. You build something they can't see. You become invisible. No flash, no noise. You trust nobody. Not your brothers, not your woman, not me if I was still breathing. Every person in your organization is a potential thief. Frank absorbs every word like scripture. This is the education Harvard doesn't teach. The emba of the streets, delivered in a rain-soaked Cadillac by a dying king to his chosen successor. "Let's get something to eat," Bumpy says suddenly. Wells Restaurant. They drive 7 minutes through empty streets. Frank parks outside Wells on 7th Avenue. Bumpy climbs out slowly, one hand on the car door for support, trying to stand tall one last time. They make it 3 steps. Bumpy's knees buckle. Frank catches him, arms wrapping around the old man's hollow frame. Bumpy's weight is shocking, like something essential has already left his body. "Frank," Bumpy whispers, "don't let them steal from you. Build it right. Build it silent." He doesn't finish. His eyes roll back. His body goes slack. Frank lowers him to the wet pavement as people rush over. Someone screams for an ambulance. But Frank's mind isn't on the dying king in his arms. His eyes scan the gathering crowd. Across the street, 3 men in expensive suits watch from beneath an awning. Italians. Their faces show no concern, only calculation. They're already dividing territory. Near the restaurant, 2 uniformed cops lean against their patrol car. They're on Bumpy's payroll, but their expressions say the payroll just expired. On the corner, young hustlers gather like sharks sensing blood. The king is dying, the throne is empty. The war for Harlem begins tonight. Sirens wail in the distance, growing louder. Frank stays kneeling in the rain, watching vultures circle, and makes a promise over his mentor's dying body. "I'll never let them steal from me." The words are quiet. Nobody hears them but Frank. That's exactly how he wants it. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. The lesson is complete. The student becomes the king. And the weapon that will build his invisible empire, pure white powder from the other side of the world, waits in the shadows, ready to turn Harlem into Frank Lucas's personal kingdom of fear and mathematics. Saigon, 1969. The air burns with jet fuel and revolution. While young men from Harlem die in rice paddies wearing American uniforms, Frank Lucas steps off a military transport wearing fatigues and carrying a leather briefcase filled with cash and mathematics that will rewrite the rules of American crime. This isn't a vacation. This is an invasion. The war devours everything around him. Helicopters slice overhead like mechanical vultures. Trucks loaded with body bags roll past in endless convoys. But Frank sees what nobody else does. Opportunity dressed in funeral cloth. While the Italians back home fight over street corners, selling garbage they call heroin, Frank is walking into the source of the world's purest poison. The numbers drive him forward like hunger. In Harlem, the 5 families control heroin through their French Connection pipeline. Their product arrives already stepped on. 15% purity on a good day, 10% when they get greedy. They cut it again and again. By the time it reaches the corner, junkies shoot powder that's maybe 5% actual heroin. They charge premium prices for chalk. Frank's mathematics are brutal in their simplicity. Eliminate every middleman between Poppy Field and Harlem street corner. Buy pure. Sell pure. Charge half their price. Own everything. Through military contacts who've traded their souls for envelopes stuffed with cash, Frank arranges passage deeper into the war zone. A jeep carries him north through roads that exist only when bullets aren't flying. The jungle rises around him like a living wall, thick and wet and alive with unseen eyes. This is the Golden Triangle, where 3 countries meet and laws disappear, where the poppy flower blooms red like blood and governments look the other way. 3 days into territory that doesn't exist on any map, they reach Kunsaw's compound. Armed guards check Frank at 4 different checkpoints. One wrong gesture means a shallow grave nobody will ever find. But Frank keeps his hands visible, his voice calm, his movements deliberate. He's not here to fight, he's here to do business with the Opium King. Kunsaw receives him in a structure that's half military barracks, half palace. The warlord controls 70% of the world's heroin supply from these mountains. He's seen CIA spooks, corrupt generals, French chemists, Italian buyers. But he's never seen anyone like Frank Lucas. You came very far for business, Kunsaw says in careful English, studying this black man from North Carolina who traveled into a war zone, carrying nothing but audacity and American dollars. Frank doesn't flinch. I came for the best you got. All of it. No middlemen. No French connection. No Italian distributors taking their cut. Just your fields to my streets. The negotiation happens in the language of profit. Frank explains his vision of an empire built on mathematics instead of muscle. Kunsaw sees a kindred spirit, someone who understands that the best business happens in silence, in places where governments don't look. They discuss price, purity, quantity. The deal closes with a handshake that will flood American streets with 98% pure heroin. But the genius isn't in the buying. The genius is in the smuggling. Frank's cousin Leslie works military transport. He knows the sacred protocol surrounding fallen soldiers. When American boys die in Vietnamese jungles, their bodies come home in flag-draped coffins on military planes. Nobody searches these coffins. Nobody questions these flights. The dead receive honor, respect, and safe passage home to grieving families. Frank sees the opportunity everyone else refuses to acknowledge. He approaches corrupt military personnel, Men who've lost faith in the war and found religion in cash. The proposition is simple and monstrous. Heroin bricks, vacuum-sealed and odorless, hidden in false compartments inside the coffins of dead American soldiers. This is the moral event horizon, the line Frank crosses that separates criminal from monster. He's not just smuggling drugs, he's desecrating heroes, using the sacred for the profane, exploiting grief for profit. Frank justifies it with the two words that will define his empire: strictly business. The system works with mechanical precision. The coffins fly military transport, untouched by customs, unsearched by authorities, protected by the sanctity of sacrifice. Frank's people retrieve the product under cover of funeral home operations. The dead keep their secrets. The heroin flows invisible. The first shipment arrives at a military base in New Jersey. 40 kilos of pure heroin, sealed inside coffins that nobody dares open. Frank brands his product Blue Magic. The name itself is marketing genius, promising something mystical, something beyond the garbage currently poisoning Harlem's veins. He cuts it once. Just once, bringing purity down to 50%. The Italians sell trash at premium prices. Frank sells excellence at half their cost. The first test happens on a corner in Harlem. Frank's people distribute free samples, the oldest trick in the dealer's playbook. Within an hour, 3 junkies overdose. One dies on the sidewalk, needle still in his arm, face frozen between agony and ecstasy. Frank's lieutenants panic. They expect police raids. They expect Frank to pull the product immediately. Frank does the opposite. He smiles. Because he understands the twisted psychology of addiction better than any psychiatrist. Junkies don't run from danger, they run toward it. If the product killed someone, it must be the strongest thing on the street. If it's the strongest, it's what they want. If it killed him, Frank says quietly, it must be the best. Word spreads through Harlem like wildfire in a drought. Blue Magic. The heroin so pure it kills. Lines form around blocks. Addicts abandon their regular dealers, leaving Italian suppliers staring at empty corners and full inventory. Money pours in faster than they can count it. They weigh cash in laundry bags because counting takes too long. The 5 families watch their customers vanish overnight, chasing a product they've never heard of, sold by an organization they can't identify. In Little Italy, a capo asks the question that will echo through every family meeting. Who is stealing from us? They don't understand yet. They're not being robbed, they're being replaced. By a man who went to a war zone, shook hands with a king, used his own dead as mules, and sent pure poison home in flag-draped boxes. Frank Lucas has just declared war on the most powerful crime families in America, and he's won the first battle without firing a single shot. The empire rises from coffins and mathematics. The invisible king claims his throne. And the streets of Harlem will never be the same. The brownstone on 116th Street looks forgotten. Cracked steps, faded brick, windows that never catch light. But behind steel-reinforced doors and walls thick enough to muffle screams, Frank Lucas operates the most secure drug processing facility in American history. One entrance, one exit, both controlled by armed guards who shoot first and never ask questions. On neighboring rooftops, lookouts rotate in 12-hour shifts, scanning for unmarked cars, unfamiliar faces, anything that smells like law enforcement. In the basement, a furnace burns hot enough to dissolve problems and bodies with equal efficiency. Above them, behind one-way glass built into false walls, supervisors watch every movement through rifle scopes. This isn't paranoia. This is mathematics. The women arrive before dawn, always staggered, never in groups. They look like they're heading to any regular job. Coats wrapped tight against morning cold, purses clutched close. Some wear church shoes polished for Sunday service. Others wear sneakers that have walked too many hard miles. None of them look like soldiers in the most profitable drug operation in Harlem's history. Because they aren't soldiers. They're mothers, wives, churchgoers, women who've run out of options and found a man willing to pay them enough to ignore the voice screaming that this is wrong. Denise Williams climbs the stairs to the 4th floor, her hand gripping the railing like it might save her soul. She's 32 years old, a deaconess at Mount Olive Baptist Church, mother of 3 children who don't know how mama pays for their school clothes. Every step up these stairs is a step away from the woman she used to be. The ritual never changes. 1st floor check-in. Names on a clipboard. Bags surrendered. Coats removed. Pat down by women on Frank's payroll who search with the thoroughness of prison guards. No jewelry, no watches, no wedding rings, no exceptions. Then they climb to the processing room. The door opens to a space that feels more like a morgue than a workplace. Industrial air conditioning keeps the temperature at 58 degrees. Cold enough to make breath visible. Cold enough to make hiding anything impossible. Cold enough to remind them that comfort is not part of this equation. 50 stainless steel tables wait under fluorescent lights that cast no shadows. Each table equipped with scales, calibrated to detect discrepancies down to 1/10 of a gram. Above them, behind mirrored glass, armed supervisors watch every gesture, every movement, every breath. And here, the ritual reaches its most brutal point. They strip everything. Bras folded with mechanical precision, underwear removed without eye contact, stockings rolled down legs that shake from cold and shame. Naked, they walk to their assigned stations, arms crossed over chests, trying to hide what cannot be hidden in a room designed to eliminate every possible hiding place. Frank Lucas watches from behind one-way glass, hands clasped behind his back, face carved from stone. He doesn't see faces. Faces lie. He watches hands. Hands reveal truth. The way fingers linger on a bag. The hesitation before reaching for product. The microscopic tells that separate loyal workers from thieves. His cousin Huey stands beside him, uncomfortable with the sight of 50 naked women working in freezing silence. "Frank, this ain't right," Huey says quietly. "They're not soldiers, they're women, mothers. You got them working like animals." Frank turns slowly, studying his cousin like a mathematical problem requiring solution. "They're hands, Huey. That's it. Hands that make me rich." "You worried about dignity?" "Dignity doesn't feed children. Dignity doesn't pay rent. I pay them more in a week than they'd make in 3 months cleaning hotel rooms. But naked, Frank. You strip them naked like they're nothing. Because naked people can't steal from me." Frank's voice carries the certainty of absolute mathematics. No pockets, no hiding places, no trust required. You understand the numbers? 1 woman skimming 1 bag per shift, 50 women, 7 days a week. That's $70,000 a year walking out my door. Over 10 years, that's $700,000. You want to lose $700,000 because you're worried about dignity? Huey has no answer. The mathematics are brutal and undeniable. While Frank wages war against human nature inside his fortress, he fights a different battle on the streets. Every week, bags of cash travel from this building to the Special Investigations Unit of the Night D. Detectives who should be kicking down his doors instead protect his shipments. Frank pays $75,000 a month in bribes. It's a business expense, cheaper than lawyers, cheaper than prison. The police don't just look the other way, they become his private security force. But corruption can't buy loyalty inside the lab. Down on the processing floor, Denise keeps her eyes focused on her work. She measures blue magic with the precision of a pharmacist, cuts it with lactose and quinine, fills tiny glassine envelopes with practiced efficiency. Every movement is mechanical, designed to block out the reality of her nakedness, the shame that burns hotter than the freezing air. She thinks about her daughter's graduation, her son's basketball games, her youngest learning to read. These images are her armor against the humiliation. 2 tables away, another woman works with calculating eyes. Gloria Martinez, 26 years old, single mother, convinced she's found a weakness in Frank's perfect system. She's noticed the guards don't watch continuously. She's studied the patterns, the blind spots, the moments when attention shifts. She thinks she's smarter than the mathematics. She's wrong. The system runs flawlessly for 18 months. Product arrives weighed and sealed from military transport. It leaves cut, bagged, and ready for distribution. The scales balance perfectly. The mathematics never lie. Until they do. Tuesday morning, November 1971. End of shift. The supervisor weighs the finished product against the raw material consumed. The numbers should match within acceptable parameters for cutting agents and packaging materials. They don't. 7 grams missing. In the outside world, 7 grams is nothing. A teaspoon of sugar. In Frank's world, 7 grams represents $5,000 on the street. More importantly, it represents a crack in the foundation, a breach in the system that cannot be tolerated. The supervisor presses a red button. Electronic locks engage with mechanical finality. The women, half-dressed and ready to leave, freeze as the sound echoes through the room like a death sentence. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. The sound of judgment walking in Italian leather shoes. Frank Lucas enters the processing room like winter walking into summer. The temperature seems to drop another 10 degrees. 50 women, in various states of dress, stand paralyzed as fear pours into the room like poison gas. Frank examines the ledger with the concentration of an accountant auditing eternity. His finger traces the numbers. Input. Output. The mathematics that never lie. The count is short, he says, voice so quiet they strain to hear it. 7 grams. Somebody in this room thinks I'm stupid. Somebody thinks I won't notice. Somebody thinks they can steal from my table. He moves down the line, making eye contact with each woman, looking for the tell. The flinch. The guilty glance that separates the innocent from the thief. Strip, he orders. The humiliation begins again. 50 women undress with trembling hands, tears streaming down faces that reflect pure terror. Frank watches with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats. His guards search everything. Clothes turned inside out, shoes examined, hair shaken loose, mouths opened wide for inspection. Nothing. The 7 grams have vanished, like they never existed. Frank stands before the line of naked, shivering women. His face reveals nothing, but inside, something cold and final crystallizes. The mathematics have been violated. The system has been breached. Someone has declared war on his empire. One of you stole from me, he says, each word falling like a hammer blow. I know it. You know it. The numbers don't lie. People lie. Numbers don't. Silence. No one breathes. I'm going to find out who, and when I do, you won't just lose this job. You won't just lose the money. He pauses, letting the weight of his promise settle into their bones. You'll lose the right to breathe. He turns and walks out, leaving 50 women terrified and suspect. As the door closes, the camera lingers on Gloria Martinez. She stands perfectly still, eyes fixed on the floor, one hand unconsciously touching the thick bun in her hair. Hidden inside a hollow plastic hairpin, 7 grams of blue magic rest silently, waiting for tomorrow when she plans to retrieve them during a bathroom break. She thinks she's beaten the king of Harlem. She thinks she's invisible. She doesn't know that Frank Lucas never forgets. She doesn't know that this tiny act of rebellion is the first crack in the dam that will eventually drown them all. The fortress has no exits, and mathematics always collect their debts. March 8th, 1971. Madison Square Garden doesn't just host a boxing match tonight. It witnesses a coronation and an execution rolled into one blood-soaked evening. The fight of the century. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. 2 undefeated champions entering a ring where only mathematics and violence will determine the victor. 20,000 people pack seats that cost more than most families earn in a year. But the real fight isn't happening between the ropes. It's happening in the mind of a ghost who's decided he wants to be seen. For 5 years, Frank Lucas has been a rumor, a shadow that smells like money but leaves no reflection, no photographs, no interviews, no public appearances. He's generated over $1 million daily while remaining completely invisible to law enforcement, media, and the criminal hierarchies that should know his name. The Italians sell garbage heroin for premium prices, while Frank floods their territories with blue magic, so pure it kills customers who beg for more. Bumpy Johnson's voice echoes in his memory like a prayer he's recited 1,000 times. The loud man dies. The silent man lives. Stay invisible, stay safe, stay breathing. But tonight, ego whispers louder than wisdom. 3 weeks earlier, an invitation arrives at Frank's Teaneck mansion. Ringside seats. Section A, Row 1. The kind of access reserved for senators, movie stars, and men whose names appear in newspapers. Frank holds the invitation like it's a loaded gun pointed at his own head. His wife Julie watches from the doorway, reading the conflict in his face. You always said stay low, she reminds him. Stay invisible. Frank studies his reflection in the bedroom mirror. 5 years of discipline. 5 years of driving American cars, wearing conservative suits, living like a middle-class businessman while commanding an empire that generates more cash than some small countries. The hunger for recognition burns in his chest like acid. I built something they can't touch, he says quietly. One night. One fight. I deserve to enjoy what I created. The mathematics of vanity don't calculate consequences. Frank walks into the most exclusive furrier on 57th Street carrying a briefcase full of cash and a death wish disguised as ambition. The owner has dressed senators, mobsters, Wall Street kings. But he's never seen a customer examine a coat the way Frank studies that full-length chinchilla. The fur is perfect, silver gray, thick enough to stop bullets, luxurious enough to announce royalty. The price tag reads like a ransom note. $50,000, the furrier says, half offer, half test. Frank doesn't blink. I'll take it. And the matching hat. By the time he steps out of his Cadillac at Madison Square Garden, the coat has transformed from clothing into declaration of war, against his own rules, against 5 years of invisible empire building, against every lesson Bumpy Johnson died teaching him. The camera flashes hit the chinchilla, and it glows like money incarnate. Heads turn. Conversations pause. Old money squints at new money trying to decode its origin. Frank walks through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, except this sea is filled with celebrities, politicians, and predators who've spent lifetimes earning the right to breathe this rarefied air. He moves past Frank Sinatra, past the vice president, past movie producers and network executives, straight to the front row where he sits closer to greatness than men who've built legitimate empires. The seat feels like a throne. The coat feels like a crown. For the first time in his criminal career, Frank Lucas wants the world to see his face. Behind him, 3 rows back, the real government of New York watches with growing fury. Carmine Galante of the Bonanno family, Neil Delacroce of the Gambino organization, Vincent Gigante representing Genovese's interests. These men have controlled organized crime for decades. They've never seen this face before. They don't know this name. But they recognize the mathematics of power when it's sitting in front of them wearing $50,000 worth of fur. Who's the nigger in the chinchilla? The question passes between them like poison, dripping with racism and fear. They don't hate Frank because he's black. They hate him because he's independent, because he cut them out of the most profitable drug operation in American history. Because he did what they would have done if their arrogance hadn't blinded them to the possibilities. Across the arena, Detective Richie Roberts prowls the perimeter with a notebook and instincts honed by years of hunting criminals who think money makes them invisible. Roberts is an anomaly in the NIPD. Honest. Incorruptible. He's turned down bribes that would have bought houses, investigating corruption in his own department while tracking the source of blue magic that's revolutionizing Harlem's drug trade. His eyes scan the crowd, cataloging faces, making mental notes. He sees the Italian hierarchy, he recognizes the celebrities. Then his gaze stops on Frank. The chinchilla coat. The confidence, the comfort among power brokers. Roberts knows every major criminal in New York. He's studied their files, memorized their faces, tracked their movements for years. This man is a ghost. Too well-dressed to be legitimate. Too comfortable to be new money. Too invisible to be innocent. Roberts pulls out his notebook and writes the question that will destroy Frank's empire. Who is the man in the chinchilla coat? The investigation begins not with an informant or a wiretap, but with a wardrobe choice that screams wealth without explanation. The fight explodes with violence that mirrors the war Frank doesn't know he's just declared on himself. Ali dances like poetry in motion. Frazier stalks like death in boxing gloves. 15 rounds of brutality that end with Frazier's hand raised in victory and Frank's anonymity lying dead on the canvas. He barely watches the violence in the ring. He's too busy savoring the feeling of being seen, of being recognized, of sitting among the powerful and knowing he's richer than all of them combined. The coat draws attention like a magnet. Photographers capture him from multiple angles. Society reporters scribble notes about the mysterious man in the front row. Frank doesn't notice the Italians photographing him discreetly. He doesn't see Roberts writing detailed observations. He doesn't feel the net beginning to tighten around an empire built on absolute invisibility. One coat, one night, one moment of vanity that will cost him everything. The fallout begins before Frank reaches his car. In federal offices across the city, agents who've spent months tracking Blue Magic's unprecedented purity suddenly have a face to attach to their investigation. The Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office launches a task force with one mission: find the man in the chinchilla coat, map his organization, destroy his empire. They start with the mathematics. Blue Magic tests at 98% purity. Impossible for street-level dealers. This isn't local distribution, this is international smuggling on an industrial scale. They're not hunting a corner dealer. They're hunting the CEO of America's most sophisticated drug operation. Meanwhile, Frank's organization begins to fracture from the inside. His brothers, the country boys brought up from North Carolina to serve as trusted lieutenants, catch the virus of visibility. They start buying Mercedes in neighborhoods where black men should drive Chevrolets. They wear jewelry heavy enough to anchor ships. They act like the movie stars they think they've become. Tone it down, Frank warns at a family dinner in his New Jersey mansion. No more flash. No more show. You want to live long? You live quiet. His youngest brother laughs, raising a glass of champagne that costs more than most people's rent. We're kings now, Frank. Kings don't hide in shadows. Frank hears Bumpy's voice like a ghost whispering prophecy. The loud man dies. The silent man lives. But it's impossible to preach invisibility while wearing a chinchilla coat worth more than most houses. Nicky Barnes accelerates the destruction with the precision of a guided missile aimed at Frank's empire. Barnes poses for the cover of New York Times magazine, declaring himself Mr. Untouchable. The headline enrages the President of the United States. Jimmy Carter personally orders federal agencies to prioritize the destruction of Harlem's drug trade. The pressure mounts like water behind a cracking dam. Barnes throws parties that attract police attention like blood attracts sharks. He drives custom Cadillacs through streets where subtlety should be survival. He dates models and actresses, living like a celebrity while dealing death to his own community. Every photograph, every interview, every public appearance draws federal heat closer to Frank's carefully constructed shadow empire. The corrupt cops who've shielded Frank for years begin to panic. The Special Investigations Unit that's taken his bribes like communion suddenly develops selective amnesia about whose envelopes they've been opening. They see federal agents circling. They see task forces forming. They see headlines that could destroy careers and end lives. Frank Lucas is no longer a profitable partner. He's a liability wearing a target worth $50,000. Frank tries to adapt, establishing legitimate businesses to launder the tsunami of cash flowing from his heroin empire. Dry cleaners, gas stations, real estate holdings, import-export companies. But the paper trail is too thick. Every transaction leaves footprints. Every business license is a map leading directly to his door. The same mathematics that built his empire now work against him. You can't launder $1 million a day through corner businesses designed to handle thousands. The money rots in basements. It fills attics. It becomes evidence disguised as success. Winter, 1974. Frank sits alone in his Teaneck mansion, surrounded by luxury purchased with blood money and maintained through fear. The house is a fortress. Fences, cameras, armed guards, electronic surveillance. But it feels like a prison built to keep him trapped inside his own paranoia. On the table before him, $584,000 in cash waits to be counted, stacks of hundreds, piles of 50s, the physical weight of an empire built on mathematics and sustained by violence. He counts methodically, mechanically, but the numbers don't bring comfort anymore. They bring dread. Every phone call could be a wiretap. Every car parked on his street could be surveillance. Every person in his organization could be the rat that brings down the kingdom. The same paranoia that protected him for 5 years now isolates him from everyone he once trusted. He doesn't know that federal agents have spent 18 months building an airtight case. He doesn't know that wiretaps record every conversation. He doesn't know that surveillance teams photograph every meeting, document every transaction, map every connection in his organization. He doesn't know that his own people, terrified of 70-year federal sentences, have begun cooperating with investigators who promise reduced time in exchange for testimony. Most crucially, he doesn't know that tomorrow morning, January 28, 1975, his front door will explode inward under federal battering rams. He doesn't know that 70 agents will swarm through his mansion, seizing cash, records, and evidence of the largest heroin operation in American history. Frank Lucas sits in his fortress, counting money that's about to become evidence, believing he's still untouchable. The invisible king who conquered Harlem. The ghost who beat the Italians at their own game. The legend who built an empire on silence and mathematics. But legends die when they step into spotlights. Ghosts become visible when they wear chinchilla coats. And the mathematics of vanity always collect their debts with interest compounded by time and multiplied by consequences. Outside, in unmarked cars parked in winter darkness, federal agents watch and wait. They've traced blue magic from Harlem corners back to Southeast Asian poppy fields. They've mapped an organization that operates with military precision. They've identified the man who thought he could own the world while remaining invisible to its laws. Tomorrow, the invisible king becomes the most visible target in America. Tomorrow, the legend becomes a defendant. Tomorrow, the throne becomes a prison cell, and the crown becomes evidence in a federal courtroom. Tonight, Frank Lucas counts his money and doesn't hear the footsteps of justice walking toward his door. The chinchilla coat hangs in his closet like a $50,000 noose, waiting to complete the execution it began at Madison Square Garden. The loud man dies. He just doesn't know it yet. January 28, 1975. Dawn breaks over Teaneck, New Jersey, cold and gray like judgment rendered in winter light. Frank Lucas sleeps in his fortress mansion, surrounded by luxury purchased with heroin and maintained through fear. The chinchilla coat hangs in his closet like a $50,000 noose, its work complete. The battering ram hits his reinforced door at 5:32 a.m. first strike. Second. Third. The lock snaps like a neck breaking. 70 federal agents pour through the opening like a tsunami of consequences. DIA, FBI, U.S. Marshals, ATF. The entire alphabet soup of American justice pointed at one man who thought mathematics could make him untouchable. Frank wakes to chaos. Boots on hardwood, voices shouting his name, his wife screaming, red laser dots dancing across his chest before his fingers close around the pistol in his nightstand. 9mm barrels stare him down from across the bedroom. The invisible king who outsmarted the mafia raises his hands in surrender for the first time in a decade. They don't find mountains of heroin. Frank is too smart for that. The product stays in motion, never sitting still long enough to be caught. But they find something better. In the basement, behind false walls, they uncover $584,000 in cash, bundles of hundreds stacked like bricks, rubber bands straining against the weight of greed. Above it, ledgers documenting the financial nervous system of the largest heroin operation in American history. Mathematics turned into evidence. In the federal holding cell, the numbers come at him like a death sentence. Conspiracy to distribute heroin. Operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Tax evasion. Corruption of public officials. Layer upon layer of statutes designed for men exactly like him. His lawyer lays it out with brutal clarity. 70 years, Frank. Maybe more. You're 44 now. Do the math. 70 years. The rest of his natural life behind bars. No mansions. No cash. No throne. Just concrete, steel, and the echo of his own regrets echoing in a cell until death provides the only parole. The government expects omerta. The Italian code of silence. Take your time. Die with your secrets. Go down a king. But Frank Lucas didn't grow up on omerta. He grew up on mathematics, on Bumpy's lessons about survival, on a different kind of law. The law of staying alive, legacy versus survival, throne versus heir, honor versus freedom. Frank makes the choice that kills the legend and saves the man. I'll give you cops, he says quietly. You want the big ones? I'll give you everybody. Frank doesn't give up street dealers. Street dealers are replaceable. Frank gives them the foundation. the infrastructure, the names that matter. He destroys the Special Investigations Unit of the NYPD, naming detectives who took his bribes for years. Badge numbers, specific payments, dates and locations of envelope exchanges. 70 police officers investigated, dozens indicted, careers ended, pensions lost. He gives them corrupt customs agents who ignored military coffins, military personnel who smuggled heroin in flag-draped caskets, politicians who accepted campaign contributions soaked in Blue Magic's profits, the man who demanded absolute loyalty from 50 naked women working in freezing rooms betrays everyone to save himself. The trials reveal the true mathematics of Frank's empire. Prosecutors present evidence that Blue Magic killed over 1,000 people during its reign. Overdoses. Murders over territory. Violence spawned by addiction that hollowed out entire neighborhoods. Denise Williams testifies about the psychological torture of working naked while cutting heroin that killed children, describing shame that never washed away and money that could never compensate for participating in genocide disguised as entrepreneurship. Frank serves reduced time, 15 years instead of 70. Mathematics of betrayal calculated in years of freedom purchased with the destruction of everyone who trusted him. When he walks out in 1991, his empire is ash, his legend permanently stained by the word that follows him like a shadow: rat. He returns to a Harlem that doesn't recognize him. The brownstone on 116th Street stands abandoned, windows broken. The fourth floor where 50 women once worked naked is now empty except for ghosts. The stainless steel tables are gone. The industrial air conditioning silent. The one-way glass shattered. This room represents Frank's true legacy. Not the millions he made or the empire he built, but this empty space, cold and abandoned, stripped of everything except the memory of what happened here. Frank Lucas proved that paranoia could build an empire, but it couldn't build a soul. He controlled bodies but couldn't control ego, not Nicky Barnes, not the corrupt cops, and ultimately not his own. He became the king of Harlem by trusting no one and controlling everything. But when the crown became too heavy, when survival demanded sacrifice, he betrayed the very code that built his throne. He chose survival over loyalty, freedom over honor, life over legend. Frank Lucas became the most successful drug dealer in American history and the most productive federal informant in the war on drugs. But the final question isn't whether he was a criminal genius. The mathematics prove he was. The question is whether genius matters when it's built on bodies, sustained by betrayal, and abandoned the moment consequences arrive. Was Frank Lucas a legend who conquered Harlem and beat the system? Or was he just the most successful rat in the game, demanding loyalty he never intended to honor, building an empire on mathematics that ultimately calculated his own betrayal as the price of breathing free air? The empty room on 116th Street offers no answer. It simply stands as testimony to what remains when empires collapse, when legends betray themselves, when the invisible king steps into light and discovers that visibility is just another word for target. The throne is empty. The empire is ash. And the mathematics of consequence always collect their debts.